Welcome everyone to this webinar from Blueprint, the additive manufacturing consultancy. Firstly, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks for spending the next 30 to 40 minutes or so with us. And I am sure that you will leave at the end of this webinar with some new information and most importantly, a new perspective on what 3D printing can do for you and your business. In today's webinar, we'll be exploring how 3D printing can enable the design and production of parts and products with embedded functionality. And to understand this concept better, we'll be taking a dive into some industry case studies where this idea of embedded functionality, intelligence and sensing is being put into action. So let's get started. But before we get started, some quick introductions. My name is Oliver Smith and I carry the title of Senior Innovation Consultant at Blueprint. A snapshot of my life at Blueprint involves working with our partners and clients, be they from the pharmaceutical industry to the aerospace sector, cosmetics to consumer goods, and working with them to identify how and where 3D printing can add value to their business, then work with them to take those ideas down the funnel and help make them real. In short, to help businesses innovate meaningfully with additive and to help make those innovations a reality. Now, this webinar is part of an ongoing series called Beyond Products, How 3D Printing Can Drive True Business Innovation. This series focuses on how 3D printing and additive manufacturing is capable of doing a lot more than just producing products, but when approached with the right mindset and applying the right methodologies, can in fact be used as a tool to drive many new forms of value within a business, from upstream to downstream, internal to external. Simply, its value to a business goes a long way beyond just printing parts. It can be used to design an entire business. So as I just mentioned, knowing how to apply additive to drive business innovation requires a particular mindset, a methodology. So what is this different mindset? What we're looking at here on the screen in front of us are the 6 drivers for 3D printing business value. It may appear simplistic, but it is actually the culmination of 15 years experience consulting industry on 3D printing adoption. What we found during our consulting engagements over this time was that the same underlying recommendations or principles would arise time and again. And these bridged every industry we worked with. There was a pattern here. We just needed to find it. So we spent a lot of time analysing our work and the work of others in the field to determine once and for all how 3D printing can, at a fundamental, foundational level, influence how a business behaves, how it differentiates itself technologically compared to other manufacturing methods, what are the core strengths and processes of insertion within a supply chain, so on and so forth. The end result was the 6 drivers framework, a simple, intuitive and easy to use set of principles for understanding how additive delivers value to a business. This is the mindset that we use in our consulting approach, and it is this that I hope you will all learn in detail throughout this series and apply in your own approach when it comes to advancing and innovating your own business with this technology. In this webinar episode of the Beyond Products series, we will be taking a deeper dive into the driver of embedded functionality. For those of you new to this series, the 6 drivers framework, or just unfamiliar with Blueprint in general, I'd suggest watching the first episode in this series to learn the basics of the drivers framework, get an overview perspective of what it is, how it works, how it was constructed, as well as learn a bit more about Blueprint. But for the next 30 minutes or so, we will be focusing hard down on embedded functionality. What does this mean? Why should it be of interest to you? And how is it being applied in the real world to drive innovation for some forward-thinking companies? First off, what do we mean by embedded functionality? So let's agree on some definitions before we start this exploration. Of all the drivers, the principle of embedded functionality is by far the most bleeding edge, the most sci-fi in some instances, certainly I think the most cool. It encompasses capabilities that are the furthest away from what can be expected and seen from traditional manufacturing processes. Think printed electronics, shape-changing objects, passive sensing. This is most definitely the realm of R&D, research papers and the vision of the future concepts. But don't dismiss this driver as the realm of purely science fiction and Star Trek. Yes, a lot of the capabilities of this driver are at the lower end of the technology readiness spectrum, if you're familiar with that measurement. But just as mobile phones, the internet, and genomic medicine have and still are transforming our world, the potential applications and benefits of this very nascent 3D printing driver are going to be seismic in the coming decades. So with all these futuristic ideas in mind, such as 4D printing, print electronics, we need to agree on a statement that describes this very sci-fi and varied driver of embedded functionality in a way that's easy to understand and communicate. At Blueprint, we define this driver in a reasonably simple way. Quote, "The digital nature of 3D printing allows for the precise positioning of multiple materials at the micron scale, enabling embedded intelligence and functionality." Close quote. So, to unpack that statement just slightly, embedded functionality is, at its core, about positioning materials in an intelligent way. And if you can do that, say, putting conductive material in one place in a part, flexible material in another part, or even engineering voids within your part, you can start to do some interesting things that, in a manner of speaking, make your part more intelligent. 3D printed electronics, embedded components, passive sensing, functional impact absorption, programmable shape change, all these really cool sounding capabilities are inherently enabled by simply placing specific materials in precise places within a part. And this is how 3D printing as a layer by layer process is uniquely capable of driving the design and manufacture of products with this embedded functionality. So embedded functionality sounds very interesting, it sounds really cool, but also it can seem somewhat hypothetical. So let's bring all this back to earth. How is industry applying the principles of embedded functionality like I just described? Before we can answer this, we need to go one level deeper, and then I promise we will answer the question. We need to define the discrete ways in which embedded functionality can be applied, going from theory to practice. As those of you who have watched our previous webinar episodes in this series, you're familiar with the framework, you'll be familiar with the 3D printing tactics. But for those of you who are new to this framework, let me give a very brief explanation. The 6 drivers are principles for how 3D printing can impart value to a business, but they are high level. They're conceptual. Behind these 6 drivers are the 50 tactics. These are, as the name suggests, tactical examples of how each of the drivers, the concepts, the principles of these drivers, can be and are being put into action today by industry. In the case of embedded functionality, we have identified 11 observable tactics, all of which are formed from our work with and observation of industry, academia, putting the principle of embedded functionality into action. And surprisingly, there is quite a spectrum of applications from the R&D level right through to commercial products across a pretty wide range of industries. In the consumer's good industry, for example, we are seeing Zweikamp selling shin guards with 3D printed shock absorbing structures, or PQ Eyewear, who are utilising variable stiffness inspired from the design of animal vertebrae, believe it or not, with the design of spectacle frames to take the place of conventional hinges. Toward the more R&D proof of concept end of the spectrum, we have some very interesting examples such as 3D printed and encapsulated electronics, which could lead to some radical disruption in the wearables market. And equally as exciting is developments in the robotics industries, who are utilising the multi-material capabilities of some 3D printing processes to create much more advanced, tactile and bionic end-of-arm effectors that can replicate how organic beings move, behave, navigate and interact with the world. Robots that interact with the world like humans do. So, a lot to start thinking about. We have a lot to explore. And there is indeed a lot going on in this space of embedded functionality. But now I want to go into some detail on just a few of the standout examples of what I think are some really great descriptive case studies that exemplify this principle of embedded functionality. Pioneers who have fully adopted the additive mindset and are doing some really interesting things. First, we'll take a look at the world of pharmaceuticals and how one company has not only used the capabilities of 3D printing to create a more advanced drug delivery system, but has engineered a production process which could allow for the future of pharmaceuticals to look very different. And secondly, we'll look at how 2 companies have come together to beat forgers and counterfeiters by incorporating some advanced counterfeit prevention technology into their products. So let's start with our first tactic that we're going to explore: predictable degeneration and absorption. What do we mean by this? To engineer something that will break down in a predictable way, or perhaps absorb fluids at a controlled speed? First off, a definition for this tactic. Quote, having fine control over microstructures enables designers to create porosity or microfluidic channels that control how liquids flow into parts. Capillary action can be used to produce complex effects with a single material through clever design. Close quote. So based on this definition, we can communicate in a concise way that 3D printing can be used to precisely control the passage of fluids. The second point to raise is why. Why you would do this is probably not particularly obvious to most businesses across a lot of industries, at least on the surface. But to a chemical processing company, food and drink manufacturers, pharmaceutical companies, even some energy generation and electronics manufacturers, the ability to finely control how much and at what speed liquid moves through an object is critical to their production processes. So to demonstrate this tactic in action, we're going to take a closer look at the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry is a strange beast, in the sense that it is driven to be as innovative as possible, but it also has to be incredibly conservative. Imagine the industry as a car with two drivers, one with their foot firmly on the accelerator and the other frantically pushing on the brake. These represent the drug manufacturers and the regulatory bodies, one wanting to move as fast as possible and the other wanting to stop a 10-car pile-up. Innovation in this space is therefore tightly controlled, regulated, tested, proven, retested, to ensure that the proposition, whether it be a new drug formulation or a production process, is safe for the public. And this can take a long time. But once an innovation passes this initial green light, something happens. The driver of the car lifts their foot off the brake and the entire industry is propelled forward. This concept of companies and industries leapfrogging from one paradigm to another has been observed time and time again, and the pharmaceutical industry is a great example of us seeing this in action, leaping from one knowledge discipline or technology to another, each time changing the game. In pharmaceuticals, these leaps have been observed when we moved from organic chemistries into the realm of microbiology, in essence moving from chewing willow bark to cure a headache to skimming off the secretions of mould growing in a petri dish to make antibiotics. And today we are witnessing the next leap, where companies are leaping from microbiology, which has been the foundation of drug development for over 100 years, into the new field of genomics, where a patient's genes determine the kind of drugs and therapies that they receive. So if we follow this pattern of behaviour, what we can assert is that in the pharmaceutical industry, periods of strong innovation and advancement in the field are founded on the discovery, testing and approval of new foundational advances, be it drug synthesis or pharmaceutical production. So how does this relate to the topic of this webinar? How does this all tie back to 3D printing? Well, as we are all most likely aware of, the hot new word on every industry's mind is personalisation, personalisation, personalisation. From the automotive to entertainment industries, the drive to allow consumers to bespoke their physical experiences as much as they do their digital ones is becoming the new battleground for market dominance and differentiation. The same can be said for the pharmaceutical industry, although not for trivial reasons like you may choose the colour of your car or the band on your new smartwatch, but for life-changing reasons, where the drug therapy is entirely tailored to the pathology and the need of the patient, of you. This is a real focus for the pharmaceutical industry, to be the first to enable patient-specific drug production that is scalable, flexible, economic, and approved by the relevant regulatory authorities. We could even call this the next leap. How do we know this is the case? Just follow the money. The pharmaceutical industry in the last 2 decades or so has significantly increased its investment into specialty and personalised medications and treatments, with personalised medication in particular having doubled in its share of drug R&D expenditures in 5 years. If we look at pharmaceutical R&D investment, it is projected that specialty and personalised therapeutics will comprise almost 47% of pharmaceutical spend. Half of what pharmaceutical companies spend will be on specialty and personalised medication. So, is this swell of money actually driving change in the marketplace? Are we seeing a surge in these types of specialty drugs? So to answer that question, let's look at some numbers. That's to give you a sense of scale. In 2017, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, the FDA, approved 46 new novel drugs. That's 46 new novel drugs in 2017. By comparison, only 8 were approved in 2008. That's a big difference, but that still may not seem a lot, especially when we consider that there are 12,000 different types of drugs in the world, or at least legal drugs and medications available today. But personalised medication won't be for things like a headache or a cough. It won't be to take the place of paracetamol or ibuprofen. Specialty medications, including the personalised therapeutics, will be for those conditions that none of us hope to suffer from. So if we look at something like advancements in cancer treatments and the positive effects that new therapies are having in that field with survival rates, consider that there have been 63 new cancer therapies developed in the last 5 years, so that's approximately 10 a year. So the 46 new specialty drugs in 1 year demonstrate the level of investment and commitment by the pharmaceutical industry. You could almost even say that the industry is preparing to take a long run up to take its next leap. So now let's bring this back to 3D printing. Of all places, you might not expect a small pharmaceutical company out of Pennsylvania, United States, to be the first one to make the leap. Aprecia was founded in 2003 and has focused on developing more targeted and more effective drug delivery systems. Their latest development has been their zip dose technology. What is that? In short, it is a new production method of manufacturing drugs that can rapidly dissolve and break down as soon as they enter the body. Their process uses 3D printing to form drug tablets layer by layer, using powder and a binding agent. When these tablets come into contact with liquid or moisture, like say in your mouth, these porous structures immediately wick any available liquid into their interior, and then the bonds binding the tablet together will immediately disintegrate, causing the tablet to dissolve almost instantaneously. The first drug to market utilising this technology was Spritam, which is an anti-seizure medication. Now, the risk with a seizure patient is that the drugs they need to alleviate the symptoms of a seizure could in themselves cause the patient to choke. The zip dose technology in Spritam eliminates this risk, as it dissolves as soon as it enters the patient's mouth within seconds, as opposed to minutes that comes with conventional tablet designs. The innovation here is twofold. It is both the design of the tablet, which leverages the tactic of predictable degeneration and absorption, and the proprietary 3D printing process itself. The capability to create porous structures that exhibit hydrophilic behaviours, that is, that it attracts liquid, and tuning this porosity so you can precisely control the rate of disintegration are levels of functionality that would be very difficult to achieve through traditional means. So by applying the unique principles of embedded functionality enabled by 3D printing, Aprecia can provide drug manufacturers a new value proposition, a new level of functionality, which can be both leveraged to provide better patient care, but also to strengthen a company's position in an incredibly competitive and locked down market space. And I also want to talk about the other major innovation Aprecia have brought forward beyond the design of their fast melt drugs, their 3D printing process. As I mentioned, the tug of war between innovation and regulation can be stifling in this industry, but when a new innovation makes it through the regulators, is approved, it can lead to very big changes. What Aprecia have done is develop the first FDA-approved 3D printing process for the production of pharmaceuticals. This is the first major milestone. We now have a new production platform by which drug companies can expand the functionality of their current and future products by embedding predictable, highly tuned disintegration. But there's a second milestone here. As a layer-wise process, 3D printing gives us much more freedom to add different materials within a single printed part. And as an entirely digital process with no need for tooling, you can manufacture batches of products, all of which are individual and unique. So we have an FDA-approved process that is flexible enough to produce individual drug tablets with variable dosages at an economic piece part cost. What this all adds up to is the next leap to personalised medicine, or at least the technology to allow companies to make the leap. The focus of much of the pharmaceutical and healthcare industry today, as I've shown you in the numbers. And it's being ushered in by 3D printing. And now let's move on to our second tactic that we're going to explore, embedded components. Perhaps unlike the concept of predictable degeneration and absorption, the idea of embedding components is a much easier concept for us all to grasp. We can all take a breath. Yet at the same time, it is equally as ambiguous. In today's world, what doesn't contain embedded, discrete electronics or mechanical systems? From in-ear hearing aids to cavity walls, most things in our modern world could be considered in some fashion to contain embedded components. So we need a more rigorous definition of this tactic in the context of 3D printing. Our definition of embedded components is as such, quote, voids can be deliberately designed into parts to house electronics, sensors, or mechanical components. These components can be inserted during manufacture, allowing for better part integrity and lower post-processing costs, close quote. So, strictly speaking, we are referring to the ability of 3D printing as a layer-wise process to allow components, electronics, sensors, actuators, and much more to be either embedded within the part during the printing or directly printed into the part using new materials, culminating in those components being entirely encapsulated, embedded within a final printed part. And to see this tactic of embedding components in action, I'd like to take you on a quick journey into the dark, strange world of the counterfeit economy, where nothing is as it seems. Now, the total value of the counterfeit economy, that is, the value of all the goods believed to be counterfeit, is estimated to be around 7% of the world's trade. That's $650 billion, not million, $billion a year lost. To help you wrap your head around this number and how much product that number represents, the combined revenue of Apple and Amazon comes in at around 500 billion. So this should just paint a picture of the scale of the issue in terms of quantity of stuff being counterfeit. But this $650 billion industry doesn't just comprise of designer handbags or the latest smartphones. There is a much darker side to this counterfeit economy, and it is actually killing people. Take your car, for instance. 36,000 deaths and 1.5 million injuries are caused each year because of counterfeit automotive parts in circulation. And for those of you who have a fear of flying, which I confess I also do, so this was hard to discover, I would suggest covering your ears from what I'm about to say. Because according to some estimates, around 10% of airplane parts in use in the air today are fake counterfeit knockoffs. I think we can all agree these numbers are startling, if not downright scary. But to understand how uniquely dangerous the counterfeit economy truly is, we need to look back at the pharmaceutical industry. $200 billion of that $650 billion is spent on fake counterfeit drugs, manufactured across the globe and distributed and sold, either primarily online or even in some instances more so in developing nations and lowly regulated markets, in pharmacists and even administered by hospitals who have unwittingly been conned into buying fake pharmaceutical drugs. What does that look like in reality? It looks like 1 million people dying every year from taking fake, ineffective or toxic pharmaceuticals. That's more than one person dying every minute. So to put to bed this image of the shifty-eyed, trench coat-wearing gentleman delicately approaching you with an offer on a surprisingly cheap Breitling wristwatch, which you just know will break within a week. The counterfeit economy is a serious danger to consumers, travellers, and patients. Now, there are many measures that manufacturers can take, and many precautions that we as buyers can take to avoid these counterfeits and sidestep the risks. The bad news is counterfeiters, like lockbreakers and cyber hackers, are always on the lookout for workarounds to the latest system, technology, regulation that prevents them from creating cheaper, lower quality knockoffs. And much like the example I gave in the Aprecia case study about how the industry goes through leaps of innovation, so too has counterfeit prevention made some pretty major leaps. Starting out far in the early days with legal frameworks and legal deterrents, then applying physical marking, barcodes to products to allow traceability. Then digital traceability and connected databases came in, where you could reference parts with a larger database. Which leads us to today, the latest leap in this field, and it is, surprise surprise, like everything else apparently in today's world, blockchain. Blockchain is the ultimate weapon against preventing the unauthorized duplication and manipulation of data, and by extension, the product or part that data is married or assigned to. Chronicled, a blockchain and supply chain solutions company based out in San Francisco, is one of the companies fighting this battle with blockchain technology, as well as some other pretty impressive tools to help ensure traceability, provenance, and trust within the supply chain. But digital security isn't the final hurdle. As strong as your digital security may be, if counterfeiters can still tamper with the physical components of your security system, they can find loopholes and exploit them. So to address this, Chronicled, a leader in digital security and counterfeit technologies, partnered with the 3D printing technology developer and service bureau Origin to close off this final loophole of physical tampering. The result of this collaboration was a physical 3D printed tag that contained an RFID tag complete with a fully encrypted and unforgeable digital authentication that is embedded into the part during the 3D printing process. The way this is accomplished is the printing process is paused at a specific point in the print. Then the electronics are introduced into a cavity within the part. Then the 3D printing is allowed to resume, where the electronics become hermetically sealed within the part. So, by embedding the electronic components of the digital security feature within the physical tag, there is no way of extracting these components without compromising and destroying the electronics, not to mention damage the tag, which would show visual tampering. As Chronicled CEO Ryan Orr describes the solution, quote, "In the past, consumers have had to rely on imperfect solutions when purchasing high-end items. Especially online, buyers have had to gamble on the trustworthiness of often anonymous sellers in a world where the quality and preponderance of counterfeit goods is increasing with each passing year. These 3D printed smart tags solve that problem by giving each item a unique, unforgeable identity running on a blockchain backend." Close quote. What I find just as compelling as the embedded blockchain-backed intelligence in these tags is the more basic ability to 3D print parts that contain embedded electronics. This ability to allow every unique part to have a unique identity that is founded in the electronics within the component, within the part. The Chronicled Origin partnership created authenticity tags that debuted with a line of designer sneakers from Beast Mode. Now, the value of designer sneakers are very high, and dare I say, it is less about the superior performance of those shoes than it is the status symbols and brand image. In turn, these products are kept at a high price point by the brands to maintain that brand image, brand equity, and perceived value of the customer. Then enter, almost as a natural inevitability, the counterfeiters, who provide low-cost duplications to customers who want to buy into this brand image, but don't necessarily want to spend the money required to do so. Hence, having an advanced counterfeit prevention device with the Beast Mode shoes and other designer sneakers, fashion and apparel, luxury goods that are all so susceptible to being counterfeit, allows an owner to guarantee that their product is legit, the real deal, by using a smartphone to check the authenticity of their product, but to also see its life and previous owners, its history, which also has value to the end user. Staying with consumer goods, the primary conversation with 3D printing and consumer products is personalization. So with this in mind, what happens when customers can not only personalize their products, or brands can order short runs of product lines, but still have the option to embed electronics into these low volume or customer bespoke unique products? CEO of Origin, Chris Pruka, answers that question. Quote, "The 3D printed Chronicled tag is the first product that can be adapted to fit entirely different markets in minutes. We can match the product's look and feel to fit brands, retailers, and consumers' taste in different luxury goods markets without additional costs or delays. Close quote. So with this versatility, we can start to think beyond counterfeit prevention. What other benefits from new means of customers engaging with your products, to brands monitoring the usage of their products to steer their new product development times? There's a lot of other benefits that can be enabled by embedding components that we can start to think about here beyond counterfeit prevention. But as I mentioned in the previous slide, there are some much more legitimate demands for part provenance, authenticity, and counterfeit prevention, such as aerospace components, medical devices, pharmaceuticals, critical infrastructure components, military equipment, and so on. What 3D printing allows us to do is manufacture complex parts that, through better design, can outperform their traditionally manufactured counterparts. But by also embedding intelligence and traceability into the parts during production through embedded electronic systems, we can begin to create parts that can store and communicate their entire life cycle via a blockchain encrypted database through a simple scan of a device or even a phone. So whether it's ensuring the provenance of critical components within an engine, nuclear power system or aircraft, or whether it's to streamline and reduce costs in inventory management by having every part that's sat in your warehouse able to passively communicate digitally via embedded electronics to a central database, the opportunities for embedded trackability and embedded digital systems are significant, and we are just starting to scratch the surface. So this brings us to the end of our webinar on 3D printing and embedded functionality. What have we seen? What have we learnt? We've seen two very different examples of embedded functionality in action, and we've learnt that the benefits and capabilities of this principle are not just confined to science fiction, but actual commercial application. These two examples, Appreciate and Chronicled, are applying the benefits of 3D printing and embedded functionality to innovate the functionality of their respective products, to give them a step up in their industries to get ahead in their marketplace. But, as per the theme in this series, the true innovation here goes beyond products. For sure, Chronicled and Appreciate are utilising additive to manufacture higher value products with more advanced functionality, better features, more intelligence, and so on. But each of these case studies is not just a terrific example of product innovation, it is a compelling example of how 3D printing is driving business innovation. For Appreciate, they have developed a platform that could potentially pave the way for the next great wave of pharmaceutical innovation into hyper-specialised and personalised medicines and pharmaceuticals. And Chronicled are not so much developing just a counterfeit prevention system, but are developing a method of manufacture that allows us to begin designing our parts and products, whether it's a luxury handbag, aerospace bracket, medical device, to contain a degree of embedded intelligence, allowing previously static parts to begin communicating to larger digital systems, a true Industry 4.0 vision of the near future. So, with these insights in mind, I want you all to really think on these examples and the more fundamental innovations that they are representing. 3D printing and embedded functionality allows us to radically rethink our expectations of what can be expected from a product, down to a simple, discrete part or component such as a screw. From integrated actuators, predictable and programmable shape-changing behaviours, advanced shock absorption, intelligent part wear indication, 3D printing allows us to make our products smarter, more self-sustaining, and more robust. So, I want to leave you with a quote from Nicholas Negroponte, who holds the distinguished position of Chairman Emeritus at MIT's Media Lab, was one of the early creators of Wired magazine, and is a prolific voice in the conversation around Internet of Things, which in a manner of speaking is what we've been talking about with embedded functionality. Quote, "When we talk about the Internet of Things, it's not just putting RFID tags on some dumb thing so we smart people know where that dumb thing is. It's about embedding intelligence so things become smarter and do more than what they were supposed to do." Close quote. And before I sign off, I'm aware that we only covered 2 of the tactics of embedded functionality. If you remember at the beginning of this webinar, I actually listed 11 unique tactics for how this principle is being put into practice in the real world. Well, fear not, because we take a look at these as well as the other 39 tactics and 5 drivers in our free to download book we lovingly call the Little Blue Book of 3D Printing. So please feel free to head over to the additiveblueprint.com site to download and explore the book, The Full 6 Drivers Framework, and take a look at all 50 case studies and 50 tactics. I'm sure this will give you some inspiration for your own thinking. And finally, this is where I shall say goodbye. I am really grateful for you attending and watching this webinar episode. I truly hope that you have learned something new about 3D printing and its potential benefit and application when it comes to this idea of building smarter, more capable products. If you want to carry on the conversation, if anything I've said or you've seen in the screen in front of you has spurred a thought, a question, then drop me an email at hello@additiveblueprint.com. And I always enjoy speaking with our community on their ideas or what they are currently doing with 3D printing. With that, I've been Oliver Smith, Senior Innovation Consultant at Blueprint, and I shall say goodbye, thank you, and look forward to speaking with all of you again very soon.